All right, cool. So you know what? Why don't we get started? So Brad and Andrew, thank you guys very much for jumping on this call with us today. Obviously, we've got you here because of the state of the world that we're in today with COVID-19, and obviously there's been some changes that are happening, obviously out in Peterborough, and so we thought that it was the best to bring you guys on the call to talk about the changes and how you guys are dealing with those changes. So for anybody that's on the call who doesn't know Andrea Stillman or Brad Appleby, I'm just going to give them a quick introduction. So Andrea Stillman, she works at the City of Peterborough as a permit technician. And she's been working there since 2015, and essentially she handles the application for the secondary suites when it comes into the building division. And then Brad Appleby, he is a supervisor of development planning for the City of Peterborough, and Brad's been there for a little bit longer, since 2008, and he is responsible for overseeing the city's planning approval process for planned subdivisions and the condominium. So Brad, Andrea, thank you guys very much for being here. I'm definitely excited to kind of hear about, how things have changed and how we can all kind of work through this, whether or not we're thinking about purchasing an investment property out in Peterborough in the coming maybe weeks or months, or people that have already, or investors that have already purchased properties. How do they move forward with what's going on? So I guess really the first question that I'm going to throw out to you guys is, how has this affected you guys, and what type of process do you guys have in place right now?
Well, I could start with.
Thanks for having us. Yeah, go ahead, Andrea.
Yeah.
I was thinking maybe I'd just start again. Yes, thank you for having us, and it's nice to be able to see people and to reach out to you to talk about this and fill you in on what's happening, just so everybody is aware. So as from a building permit submission perspective, as many of you are aware, Doug Ford released on Friday that there were some changes to the construction as far as essential services. And so that has changed some of the way that we're doing business right now. We are still accepting applications. We are still taking payment. We are still reviewing. So most of our staff are working from home that work in the office doing the review process. Inspections are still happening. Our inspectors will have different criteria maybe for going out. They won't go to certain homes that are inhabited at this point, but they have sort of a checklist to go over with you when you do call in. I did send Gary a link to our website, to the news and notices that he can share with you, and a frequently asked questions page that will sort of go over what I'm going to cover today. You'll want to keep an eye on our news and notices on our webpage, and that will keep you up to date on what services are reopening, hopefully soon, and what is happening at the city. Just from a residential perspective for building permits, if you are building a new home and you have a footing permit that has been issued for a single unit dwelling, you can continue with construction. If you have an above grade structural permit for condos or mixed use buildings, those can continue for inspections and such. Renovations, and this is probably more in what you guys are looking for. If you have a permit that was issued and work was started prior to April 4th, 2020, you may continue that work. If you are submitting an application now or going forward until we hear differently, we cannot issue any new permits. If you had a permit that was issued prior to April 4th that you had not started on, you are not to be doing construction on that renovation. And then just the last thing that's permitted is construction and maintenance to temporarily close existing construction sites. So that's kind of what the province has handed down to us. We are accepting applications online. at residentialpermits@peterborough.ca, or you can drop off hard copies at our office in the north end of the city. There's a drop box just inside of where you would normally come into our offices. So the inspections that are taking place are foundation, structural, plumbing, HVAC, alarm and detection. Otherwise, no inspections in an occupied dwelling. So I know I went through that fairly quickly, but I'm sure you'll have some follow-up questions for me, and I hope I can answer them. And just to let you know that an inspection can be refused by an inspector if he finds it's unsafe, or whatever. It would be the decision of the chief building official. If that happened, then you need to stop work if an inspection is refused. So, but you can find that on our website and in that FAQ that I sent out as well. Sorry if that took a while, but
No, that was good. That was a lot of information there. Quentin, I don't know if you had any questions that you want to follow up with.
Yeah, so I guess in regards to permits, you made it clear that people can still submit an application. That's fine. So with permits that were submitted prior to April 4th, what are you seeing in that process? How long is that taking for people to get?
So we have been keeping up with our timelines since we've gone into this quarantine. What was happening was anything that was hard copy submitted at the Dropbox had a quarantine period before staff would touch it. That was about the longest time. So we had a 4-day turnover, or sort of stopping at the beginning. Then we would take it, start reviewing, but most permits were issued within those 10 days. We do have some permits that were stuck in the queue that came in just before this announcement that, you know, obviously we had no idea that was coming. Unfortunately, those are being treated just the very same as if you were submitting it today. I have actually 2 permits on my desk that are ready to issue, and I can't issue them. So yeah, if you have submitted recently and have not been issued your permit, you're not going to get it issued until after this is lifted. We are still reviewing though, so we're hoping that once it is lifted, then we can issue everything that's on our desks. And it is a good time to submit. I mean, as much as you have to wait, if there's any back and forth, if we need more information, you can still keep working on that because we're supplying those comments back to you.
Okay, so then it's just good to get it into the queue then.
Sure, yeah, absolutely. Yeah.
Mm-hmm. Okay, cool. Chris, you got any questions?
Yeah, actually, just a couple quick questions. So Andrea, you guys are still at the desk then, right?
No, the office is closed. There is a drop box.
Got it.
I do suggest if you want, if you have questions about a property, to email people. Most of us are at home, so voicemail is maybe a little bit delayed. Email is probably your fastest route to get information. Mm-hmm. We do, like, April is in there almost every day. I have been sick, so I haven't been in that often. I do plan to go in from time to time. And Susan is there almost every day. So if you need, like, to check if your property has a survey or something like that, we're still coming in and out. We're just trying not to be there all at once.
Okay. And just clarify what you said again about the infill and the infill projects real quick.
Sorry, infill.
Yeah, I thought you had mentioned something about, you know, projects obviously that are currently on the go, but projects that you said that infill, like, you know, properties you might take down and rebuild, or additions and things like that. Are you guys still looking at that, sending out inspectors to look at projects?
So yes, if you have something on the go, if you've been getting inspections all the way along, keep calling your inspector for your required inspections.
Got it. Okay. Sounds great.
He will probably have a questionnaire to go through with you. First of all, to make sure that everything is ready that he's expecting to inspect. So he's not going out there needlessly, but also probably just to ask about, you know, is it occupied, and all of those types of things to make sure it is a safe environment for him to go out to inspect.
Okay, cool.
Yeah.
Now, either one, I guess, Andrea or Brad, just in regards to, I don't know if you guys have access to this or not, but what about the unemployment numbers now in Peterborough? Do you guys see that, and what type of an impact that's had?
I think
Brad?
Brad has those numbers.
Brad, are you there?
Hi, Gary.
Hey,
Yeah, I can talk a little bit about that. Yeah, I apologize. Your voice is kind of coming in and out. My network connection's not fantastic right now, so I actually
okay.
shut my video camera off to try and free up some of my bandwidth. Um, from an unemployment point of view, so I was chatting with the folks at Peterborough Economic Development the other day, and they've been doing telephone surveys of local businesses over the last couple weeks since all these sort of shutdown orders have come into effect for various businesses. And so what they're finding, they don't have specific numbers in terms of how many people are out of work right now, but what they do have a pretty good handle on is sort of what percentage of businesses are affected. So some of the biggest impacted sectors they're finding are things like, of course, like service industries like restaurants, arts, construction are all fairly significantly impacted. In terms of like arts and entertainment venues, they found that 90% of those businesses are not really able to adapt to sort of what's happening right now. And so for the most part, they are closing down and laying people off. In the construction sector, you're looking at about 60% of businesses who weren't really able to adapt and are having to look at layoffs. So it's pretty significant. Now I would point out with construction specifically, now that everything has changed even since these surveys were done as of Saturday. So I think you'll find that more layoffs would be coming in the construction sector, particularly in instances where we had, say, new subdivisions that were in the process of being serviced, so putting in the roads and sewers and whatnot. Those are essentially shut down right now. Other fields that have been impacted, retail significantly impacted. I mean, when you drive around town, you kind of see it.
Yeah.
You see a lot of stores are either shut down, or the stores who are allowed to be open now are only open basically for curbside pickup. So they don't need the staffing that they would have once had. I tried to go to Home Depot the other day, and they weren't letting anyone in anymore as of Sunday. And so Sunday morning you had to order online and they'd bring it out to your car, and it'd be the same thing across the province, not just here in Peterborough. So there are a lot of impacts. I think what we're finding that the businesses who are able to keep working remotely, like City Hall staff, like engineering consultants, development consultants, they're still working. They're just working from home rather than in their offices. But when you drive around town, you see most of the restaurants are closed or only running drive-through or delivery, and stores as well. So it's been a pretty significant impact here.
Yeah, no, it's been a significant impact pretty much everywhere. So, okay, so listen, I'd like to maybe ask a few more questions. And then what I'd like to do is maybe open it up to anybody on the call that would maybe potentially have some questions for Brad or Andrea. So Quentin, I don't know if do you have any other questions?
Yeah, I just want to piggyback off Andrea saying we understand if there's occupants maybe in a property. Let's use a 2-unit as an example. If there are tenants upstairs and someone just completing their lower unit, would it be possible to have a final walkthrough done, via a video tour or picture, something of that nature?
I would double check with your inspector, but I would say if that unit isn't being occupied, then that's probably not an issue. I think and I would leave it up to the individual inspector because they're the ones who have been directed on how to field these questions. But it's my understanding that we just don't want the inspectors going into an inhabited home where there could be whatever, this germ or whatever around, and we start infecting our inspectors. So if it's an area that, you've had framers in or whatever, like it's just tradespeople sort of coming and going in and out of, I imagine then that is sufficient, and they would probably go out to something like that. It's where there's renos happening in an inhabited home where they may have some questions and some issues. It really depends, I think, on the situation.
Okay. Chris, you got anything? Okay,
Yeah,
I've got one. Yeah,
sorry, Andrew, I just wanted to ask real quick. You mentioned inspectors. How many inspectors right now are out, or how many inspectors on it? Typically out, and then I guess has that number changed?
So we have 2 Part 3 inspectors, so doing ICI, and then we have 1, 2, 3 Part 9 inspectors. So that's what you would see mostly for the secondary suites or the larger small rental units. And then we have 2 HVAC/plumbing inspectors, so they do both. So we haven't decreased the number of inspectors that are available. They are all still going into the office, and they are still booking inspections.
Okay, great. Yeah, thanks.
So Brad, I don't know, this may be a little too early to tell now, but I know that Peterborough has very low vacancy rates. And I wonder now with what's happening, has that had any type of an impact on that? And also too, if you can talk a little bit about Tent City and the affordable housing there as well.
So, yeah, vacancy, I mean, our vacancy rate has improved slightly this year over previous years. I mean, the last few years it was hovering around 1%. I think we've gotten to about 1.5%. So it's improving slightly. But in terms, there's still a need for apartments, still a big need for affordable housing, affordable rentals. Last summer we had a situation with anyone who was in town last summer would have seen it. A number of folks who are without homes were living in tents in Victoria Park, kind of in behind City Hall, and even on the City Hall property itself. Now that situation was caused by one of the shelters in town having to close its doors temporarily in order to do renovations. Those renovations are complete. The shelter up until a couple weeks ago was open for people, but now with the COVID-19 outbreak, we've actually closed down the various shelters around town, and we're housing all of the folks who need housing like that at the Peterborough Sport and Wellness Center over in the west end of town. It's large athletic complex on the same campus as Sir Sandford Fleming College. So there's a large gymnasium in there. We just found housing folks there. It's easier there to get them sort of the spatial separation from each other that they need, rather than being in a traditional shelter. So right now, I think we're seeing about 60 people a night staying out there. In terms of housing, though, it's an ongoing issue, and it's not unique to Peterborough. It's across. I'm going to suggest all of Southern Ontario, certainly anywhere in and around Toronto, where you have the sort of the heated housing market and high house prices and rental prices. One of the things that we're trying to do at the city is actually build relationships with sort of the various service groups who are involved in housing and homelessness, to understand, one, who's homeless and what are their needs. And we've recently joined into something called Built for Zero, which is a program, again, trying to aim at connecting people in the industry and in the service sector to address housing and homelessness. In fact, I think Durham Region is also part of that program. So it's kind of an ongoing thing, but certainly the outbreak has not helped the situation at all. In terms of new development related to sort of vacancies, I will note that we do have quite a bit of what I would call intensification development, multi-unit development in the works. We have about 30 to 35 different projects on the go in the city right now at various stages. Under construction right now, there's almost 700 units. Now, a lot of those are ownership, but some of those are rental. But the hope is over time, as more and more projects get built, we'll have a more stable supply of rentals available, and hopefully that helps generate some affordability in the market as well.
And sorry, and what's the timeline for those, Brad? I might have missed that.
For the units that are for the units that are under construction, I mean, it varies, right? So right downtown we have the YMCA project, which is I believe it's about 150 or so units. Now those, I believe, are going to be ownership units rather than rental, and that project's probably going to take a couple of years. It's a large scale project, but then there are other sites that are coming online. So they're all at various stages. Some of them might come online this year, some of them might be in a year or two. In addition to sort of those sites that are kind of in the process of construction, we also have a lot of other sites who have come in, who have either recently gone through zoning processes or are currently in the process of trying to get zoned. And once those come along, that's a significant amount of units there. You're looking at almost another probably 2,300 units potentially that are kind of waiting in the wings, waiting to go through an additional process before they can get building permits. But there's significant interest right now in multi-unit development in the city.
Okay. All right. So listen, you know what? I think I think we can now open it up for questions and answers. So anybody that's on the line, if you have a question for Brad or Andrea, you can put it in the chat box, or if you want, you can turn your mics on and fire away.
Here, Gary, let me see. We have one. Any insights on occupancy permits for industrial warehouse building?
Say that again, Quinn. I think you broke up a bit.
Broke up. Any insights on occupancy permits for industrial warehouse buildings?
I guess I need a little more clarification. I'm not sure, how many are coming, or?
Yeah, there's no name there, so we'll see if they have the opportunity to unmute themselves and clarify their question there. The next one, can you clarify? Okay, can you clarify how the building department is defining occupied dwellings? So maybe that's similar to how I was asking if the upper unit is occupied, but the lower unit's vacant. But I don't know if you want to dig deeper into that, Andrea, of what a definition of an occupied dwelling would
I
be.
would just say contact your inspector and have that conversation with them. Like I said, I have like sort of the basis here, but they were the ones who were briefed by this chief building official on what they should be going into and what they shouldn't be. And also they'll have that checklist. So if you do have an open permit, I would just reach out to your inspector and say, you know, you're at such and such a stage, can you come out to do an inspection? And they'll have a whole checklist to go through with you.
All right, there's another one here. It says,
Yeah.
any idea how many permits are on hold right now? That's actually a good question.
I know I have one large rental unit that just came in that I am reviewing. There are some, I would say 10 or less that we have asked for more information recently that we haven't been able to finish the review. I wouldn't say it's a massive number, like there's not a huge backlog. It's just, yeah, there are some that sort of got caught in that we weren't expecting it, nobody was expecting it, and here we are. I mean, these times they change really quickly, and it could change back, you know, in a short amount of time. We're not sure. So I wouldn't say there's a huge number of people that got caught, but definitely we do have permits in our office that are waiting either for information or they just came in and we haven't had an opportunity to finish the review.
Now, I don't know if you would know this, Andrea or Brad, but in regards to how many permits you guys would normally intake at this time of the year, do you see a significant downward trend?
I would say that if like from a building perspective, this is usually when we're crazy. I am imagining that after this is lifted, we will have a huge influx of permit submissions. Typically, May is our busiest month in the year. May and September seem to be the busiest months when we receive applications. But we're still getting quite a few emails. We're still getting quite a few phone calls. But I would say that our volume, because the counter is closed, our volume is down.
Okay.
I haven't checked the numbers specifically, but I would guess that.
Yeah, so guys, I know that we definitely have great questions, but I like this one in particular. What are you guys doing about handling minor variance applications, especially at this stage where we are? But maybe just in general, how does minor variance normally work for you guys?
So maybe I'll jump in on that one. For the time being, we're not able to accept any new planning applications, and a minor variance would be considered a planning application. The province, as part of their response to the outbreak, they've basically suspended all sort of statutory timelines that would otherwise apply in the Planning Act and various other acts. So what that means is if someone was to try and file an application like a minor variance, there's no timeline that applies to how long you have to process it, how long you have to give notice. If you were to try and make a decision, there's no timeline around appeal periods, that kind of thing. So we're really not able to process new applications right now. We've been working on, you know, other types of applications in the background, like zoning amendments and official plan amendments and plans of subdivision, ones that had already been submitted. We're able to kind of work on the technical details of those in the background, but anything that needs a decision from the city, whether it's through the Committee of Adjustment, like a variance, or a decision through City Council, where say a notice of decision has to be issued and there would normally be an appeal period that would apply. We're not able to issue those types of decisions right now. So really, at this point, then minor variance applications, consent applications, those sorts of things are really on hold right now.
I got a kind of a follow-up question, but it's, I guess, maybe Andrew, maybe you might be able to fill this one. This is in reference to, obviously, if there's a complaint and the inspector goes through and sees that, hey, you know, if there's an occupied unit, shouldn't be. And now I've already begun the application. I've already gotten most of the work done. I know you're not at this stage providing the actual official certificate, but that kind of leaves me in, you know, kind of a situation where I've got an illegal unit pending, but it's currently occupied, right? And I've got a work order to do something about it. Sorry, Andrew, we can't hear you. Maybe you got to unmute.
Sorry, I was coughing before. Yeah, so just you can still get occupancy inspection.
Yep, but what I'm saying is, are you guys, obviously this is a difficult situation for everybody, but I'm just trying to gauge your flexibility on this situation.
So you're saying you have a permit or you didn't have a permit and you're trying to legalize a second unit? Is that what you're
Trying
saying?
to legalize the second unit.
Yeah.
I understand that although I can get the inspections, I won't get the official certificate from the city showing legal status.
If you have occupancy, then you are able to occupy it. So if you've gone through the inspection process and the inspection process is still happening as it was before, the only thing is, like, I mean, our inspectors are not trying to make anybody in a bad situation. So if they can work with you, most, like, I would say all of our inspectors are willing to work with you.
Okay.
But there also, if there was something you could do to make sure it was legal, then I would say they would require you to do that. So they will do what they can to make sure that they can do the inspections that they need to do. Yeah, I from my from what you're describing, you should be able to get the required inspections to get to occupancy.
Right.
To be able to occupy it legally. Now, if I'm not sure, and I meant to check with our bylaw department, if you're looking at a rental unit, like a large rental unit or a small rental unit, I'm not sure what the inspection protocol is for that side, like for fire and bylaw, to go out to check those from a licensing perspective. But if it's a secondary suite, we're hoping we can get that occupancy done and then you can occupy it. You may not have final done, but as long as you have occupancy for that unit.
Okay, so you're definitely willing to work with us. That's great.
Yeah. Yeah, and like I said, I would, if you have a question, if you have an open permit and you're getting close to being ready for an inspection, I would just pick up the phone and talk to your inspector and explain the situation. And they're gonna, like I said, they're gonna have questions for you, and you can work out, you know, how can you both meet the same end, so to make sure that it's legal. Yeah.
Okay, great.
I have a question.
Brad, just got a quick question.
Okay.
Yeah, go ahead, Lou.
Andrea, you were saying that about 10 applications got caught in this shutdown. Mine is one of them. Are you guys still processing permit applications?
We're still reviewing. We're still sending out comments if there's stuff that's required. Absolutely. We're still working, but we just can't issue them.
So where does that leave me?
It means you wait till the province tells us we can issue them.
In the meantime, as a homeowner, am I not entitled to go to my property and work on it?
Not if it's work that requires a building permit.
So if I want to change a light fixture, I need a building permit?
No, that would not require a building permit, so you can do that. But if you're
So why?
pulling in interior finishes or building a deck or putting in plumbing, those things would require a permit. And if you don't have a permit issued, you can't be doing that work.
Okay. I was at my home a week and a half ago putting in light fixtures, and one of your building inspectors came by and gave me grief.
I can't speak to that specifically. I'm not sure. I don't know the circumstances on that one. I'm sorry. If you have issues with the building inspector, you can contact Jody Drum. He's in the office every day. He's our deputy chief building official. And his number is the city number. His extension is 1444. So you could follow up with him.
Okay, thank you.
Yep.
So, Brad, I just got I think some people are brand new on the call, and this is kind of their first rodeo here with respect to, learning about second suite. So, I know, back in 2018 and even 2017, we would be swinging by the city and having a few chats with you for sure. And we appreciate your efforts in what you've done to push this through. So do you think we can just take it back to the basics real quick, just for some of the new people here that really aren't familiar with what it is, what is a second suite, what we're doing, and nothing long, but basically what I'm after is just the basics on
Sure.
what types of properties that you can put a second suite in, and then let's just talk quickly about the parking, because I know that's a big deal.
Sure. Yeah. Secondary suites. So secondary suites are essentially like self-contained apartments, essentially. And they could be located either within the main house or potentially in a detached structure out in the yard. Generally speaking, the way our zoning bylaw is set up right now, any residentially zoned property could be eligible for a secondary suite. However, there are a few things you have to meet in terms of regulations. So one of the first things to check on is whether the property is in a floodplain. The way the zoning is set up, secondary suites are allowed in the floodplain. One of the other things to look at is parking, and this becomes a big issue in some parts of town. So the city, from a parking point of view, is divided into 3 zones. The downtown core being one, sort of the area just immediately on the edge of downtown being a second one, and then everything else being a third one. Now, the way the regulations were set up, we expect that if you're going to put in a secondary suite, the main house has to have its required parking under the zoning bylaw. And then if you're in that first area, the downtown core, you don't actually have to provide any additional parking for the secondary suite. You just have to have whatever the main house is required to have, which in most cases I think is 1 parking space. If you that area just on or in the what we call area 2, then you'd have to have your parking for the main house plus 1 spot for the secondary suite. And so that would be a total of 2 parking spots. And if you're further out, if you're in the sort of the newer parts of town, the suburban parts of town, then you would need 2 parking spaces for the main dwelling plus 1 additional spot for the secondary suite. So a total of 3 parking spots. And in any of those areas, the parking could be done in tandem. So you could have 1 car parked in front of the other. You could have parking inside a garage, as long as the garage is sized appropriately to accommodate a parking spot as they're sort of defined by our zoning bylaw, because our zoning bylaw has specific dimensions for a parking space. The one thing that catches some people, particularly when you're looking in the newer parts of town that are more suburban in nature, what you're finding is in some of the newer subdivisions, if you buy a house on a narrow lot, and that only fit, say, a single vehicle, and maybe there's a garage that can fit a single vehicle, you may find that you don't have room to park a 3rd vehicle there, if this is in one of the newer subdivisions. So those lots may not be eligible for a secondary suite, because the zoning bylaw does have restrictions on how wide driveways can be. And in many instances, like if you're dealing with townhouses, or if you're dealing with, say a 27-foot wide single detached lot, you may not be able to get a 3rd parking space on the property. So what we tell people, if you're thinking of investing in a property for the purpose of installing a secondary suite, give us a call in planning ahead of time, and we can, look at those issues with you to try and raise any red flags up front before you invest. Now, in terms of secondary suites, just going back to those for a second, there are some requirements around those themselves. They have to be smaller square footage than the main dwelling, so that it could even be like a 1 square foot smaller, but they have to be smaller. They are also capped at 2 bedrooms. So there's some limitations on what you can build. If you're thinking of doing one out as a detached suite in the backyard, there are some regulations that limit sort of the size of that unit relative to the size of the lot. Essentially, it's your larger lots that would be eligible for a unit out in the back, as opposed to your small subdivision type lots. One of the things that we've set up right now in our zoning is that it's an either or situation. So if you're going to do a secondary suite, it's either within the main dwelling or it's out in the yard, but it's not in both. But I can tell you at some point in the fairly near future that will be changing, because the Planning Act has actually changed since we implemented our zoning regulations to now require municipalities to allow the option of both, to have one in the main dwelling and out in the backyard at the same time. So we haven't updated our zoning bylaw to deal with that yet, but it will be coming at some point.
Oh, that's great. You heard it here first, folks.
Yeah.
I love
That's
it.
good. Yeah, that's really good. And now, Brad, I know we were talking about it earlier, and I think you had a map. Is that map now going to kind of help with just what you talked about in regards to the second unit? Like, did you want to bring that up, or was that for something else?
Sorry, I think you were. Sorry, your voice is cutting out, but I think you're talking about different maps. I do have a couple maps here that I can put up on the screen. If you're able to pass over control for a second, I can share my screen.
Yeah, if you can do that, that'd be great.
Yeah, so I've got two.
Yeah, there you go, Brad.
2 maps. Let me see here. I'll pull this one up. The one is, I'll try and see if that's visible here. All right. So there's a map. Now I apologize if it's kind of small for everyone looking on their screen, but you can kind of see the distribution of dots on there. So this map is a map of sort of active multi-unit sites at around town. So you can kind of see some of these under construction, some of these are sites that are going through zoning and official plan processes right now. Some of them are going through site plan processes. So they're all in different states of progress, but you're seeing sort of a real scattered distribution of these sites. There's quite a few. If I can pull my mouse up here, this is kind of the downtown area. So there's 3 sites happening for close proximity to downtown, and then just east of the river, there's like 4 or 5 sites in what we call East City, which are all really significant developments if they all come to be. There's a few more concentrated pockets over in the west end near Lansdowne Street West and Clonsilla Avenue, which has the potential for significant development. In total, you know, if you were to add up all the units collectively from these dots on the map, there's a potential of about 3,100 units there.
Okay. All right, thanks a lot for sharing that, Brad. And so we got a few more
Yep.
questions. Let's see if we can get through all of them before we hit the hour mark here. And so in regards to this map, is it publicly available, Brad, or is it something you can share with me that I can share with everybody on the call?
Yeah, I tend to email it to people when they ask. So if, you know, once we're done here, I can email you the map, and you can share it if you like. I actually have a spreadsheet that goes along with it that gives a little description of each site, what's
Okay.
proposed in them, that kind of thing. So I can send it along. I also have one of subdivisions, if anyone's interested in subdivisions. I have a similar map showing where the subdivisions are, and a spreadsheet that gives a little description of what's happening in those. So I can send those to you, and you can pass along to the folks on the
Sure.
line.
Okay, so I can definitely make sure whoever's on the line still that we'll get that over to you. Now there was a question here.
Yeah.
Where was it? Now, what options are available for homeowners who want to build a secondary unit but can't put a side entrance because a home in their subdivisions are too close together to legally put a side door?
You don't, I guess if you can't find a separate or a way to separate an entrance for that second unit, what we have seen a lot of people doing is either a small or large rental unit. And so that might be an option. So it functions still as a single unit dwelling, but it's a lot of people rent them out to students. And we have seen up to probably 8 bedrooms in a single unit dwelling in those cases. A lot of times we still need to have a building permit ahead of time because typically most residential houses do not have that many bedrooms in them. And so there's changing over existing rooms into bedrooms or carving it up maybe a little bit more. So we still need to have that permit. If you have 6 bedrooms or more in a dwelling unit, you will need an HVAC plan. So just be aware of that. It's not just a matter of having floor plans. There's no further parking requirements for those. You do have to go through the licensing process in the clerk's department, which includes an inspection by the fire department and bylaw department to make sure that the minimum life safety requirements are there. Typically, if you've gone through a building permit first, those things are covered anyway.
Okay. Here's a good question. So if this outbreak lasts for an extended period of time, 3 or 4 months, will the building department consider a video inspection model for residential inspections? Has there been any talks in regards to that? Or are we all being optimistic that it's not going to last that long?
I personally, I'm being optimistic, but what do I know? That would probably be a question for our chief building official and deputy chief building official if they've had any discussion on that. I have not been privy to any of those kinds of discussions. At this point, we're still planning that our inspectors are going out and inspecting like right on site. So as much as service has been disrupted, we're still doing the inspections.
Okay, so if this lasts until, say, maybe early May, could you put a sticky note just to maybe ask that question for us?
Absolutely. Absolutely. I'll make a note.
All right, beautiful.
Hey, Gary, I had a question.
Yeah.
This question is for Brad. My name is Ronald. Brad, so when you were going over the three parking areas, the three parking areas out in Peterborough, you mentioned, of course, one, you don't necessarily need to have an additional parking for the secondary unit, but in parking area 2, you do need one additional parking, and that can be in tandem. And in parking area 3, you need to have 2 units, and I know that is taken from in section 4 of the bylaw. I can see it here. I actually have it up right now. My question is, I can also, if you read below that table, so that table shows where the areas are. But if you read below that, and I'm just going to try to read this out, it's kind of legal term here. It says, notwithstanding the foregoing, nothing in the bylaw shall require a house containing an accessory apartment or secondary residential unit established pursuant to the Resident Rights Act from 1994 and in compliance with Ontario regulation, and they have that number there, apartment and on houses made under planning, and they have that number there, to have more than 2 parking spaces. So my interpretation of this is that any secondary unit is not required to have more than 2 parking spaces. Am I interpreting that incorrectly there?
Yeah, it's a little bit different than that. So that particular section deals with apartments that were created in the early prior to November of 1995, and so and what we around the office would call Bob Ray apartments. So the NDP government in the early 90s brought in legislation to basically try and legalize or recognize any existing
units,
accessory apartments.
Yeah.
Then when the Conservatives came into power in about 95, they put a stop to it. But what they did was they allowed the units that were legalized to continue, and there's still a window there for any apartments that can be proven to have been in existence prior to November 1995, that you could get those recognized as an accessory apartment. And essentially, if you do that, then the city's rules around secondary suites don't apply. So it's a sort of a different set of rules that would apply to those units. Now, at the time, what the legislation basically said was that you couldn't require, so if you wanted to put in a secondary suite back then, you couldn't require more parking than basically than 1 space for the suite, which is basically what we're doing today. The main house already, in today's rules, the main house already requires 2 spots. You add a secondary suite in there, we're only requiring 1 additional spot rather than 2. Because if we didn't do that, if we just went under our previous rules before we brought in the secondary suite regulations, then normally to take a single detached house, say in the outer parts of town, and split it into 2 units, you would require 4 spaces instead of 3.
Okay, perfect. All right, so listen, we are at the hour mark, Brad.
So we consciously decided to only require one for a suite. The one other thing I will say is that the province, I mentioned how the province had changed their regulations related to secondary suites after we had already updated our bylaw. One of the things that they required in their regulation is to stipulate that municipalities cannot require more than one extra spot for a secondary suite or per secondary suite.
Okay, Brad, thank you very much for that. Andrea, thank you very much for joining the call today. Great information. Thank you everybody for joining during your lunch break. We appreciate that as always. And so we're going to wrap it up. And Brad or Andrea, if anybody on the call wants to or needs to reach out to you, what's the best way?
For me, if you could email me, I'm at astillman@peterborough.ca.
Yeah, I'd say same for me. If you want to email me, that would be perfect. I am B Appleby, so BAPPLEBY @peterborough.ca.
All right, perfect. Thank you guys very much. I appreciate it, and enjoy the rest of your day and be safe. Stay safe. All right, thanks guys.